All right. Well, welcome everyone to this latest presentation in the Zoomtime Knowledge lecture series. This public program is made available by the James Madison University Lifelong Learning Institute. Today, I want to thank our special guest presenters. We have local co-authors of the book Bad Moon Rising, the Prom Night Murder Memoirs, Ed and Mindy Morrison. Ed was born in Newfoundland. He and his wife, Mindy, who are with us today, you should be seeing their video feed. And their two sons lived in Germany for 7 years and toured much of Europe. Upon retirement, their family relocated and resettled in the Shenandoah Valley. And I know that many of you are familiar with Ed and Mindy because they've lived locally for several years, both before retirement and now after retirement. Ed and Mindy, I want to welcome you and thank you and explain a little to our participants who are joining us, our guests, how Q&A is going to work today before I turn it over to you for your presentation. In this first part, beginning shortly, we will have a presentation that will probably go about 50 minutes or so. And during that time, your microphones are intentionally muted. After the presentation, we have scheduled time for Q&A. If a thought comes to you during the presentation that you'd like to record, just simply enter that question in the chat window. Following the presentation, we will read those questions in order from the chat window. We will also extend permission for you to selectively unmute your microphone if you want to ask something by audio, and Ed and Mindy will be able to respond to you directly, obviously through audio. They will not be responding through the chat window. That's just how we're going to collect questions. I also want to thank a few people, and that's our events and lectures co-chairs. I don't always get a chance to do that, but I do want to say I think this is number 12 in this series since we moved online. And I want to thank Chris Stern and Yogi Gillette, the co-chairs of the Events and Lectures Committee. They volunteered to coordinate the schedules and find speakers for these programs. And a special thank you to one of those committee members, Whit Menifee, who I think reached out to you, Ed and Mindy, to invite you to be part of today's presentation a long time ago. So again, welcome. Thank you for sharing this story. I know reading from the bio and reading a little bit of the book blurb that you're going to be talking about, that this has been a long journey for you. So thank you today for inviting us to be part of it. And I'm looking forward to taking it with you.
Thank you.
And you can go ahead and start. You can either introduce yourself, and whenever you're ready, you can start your screen sharing.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us. This is exciting. 2 years ago, we never thought we'd be presenting with a book through JMU Lifelong Learning. And 2 years ago, it wasn't really intended to be a book. It was just going to be a story for family history. And it just kind of evolved into something bigger than what we even imagined. It exploded. Yeah, it was just going to be a short story really for our boys, for posterity, for our own family. But as it evolved into a book, we overcame libel issues because it is nonfiction, and it is as true as we could uncover what happened. And it almost didn't become a book because it took us about 2 or 3 months to overcome all the libel issues, but the publisher didn't want to get sued. And the scrapbook that I used, that I started years ago, when 50 some years ago, when the incident happened, helped really initiate, the story. And I could kind of put the facts together, but I'm not a very good writer. So Mindy, my wife, she's the one that really polished it up and cleaned up every single chapter and wrote many chapters by herself. So I'm going to let her state, kind of what she thinks her contribution was.
Well, he lived it. That's for one thing, unfortunately. And he did tons of research. As he started going through this, he started seeing a name here and there that was associated in the news articles about this 50 years ago, and started calling some of these people. And that led from one person to another investigator here and another attorney there and a judge, and the information just exploded, not just for what happened in Illinois, but what happened even farther beyond in Kansas and California and up in the Chicago area, Idaho, Missouri. It just exploded. And so he was getting down all of the facts, and then I was taking it and then buffing it up a little bit.
She polished it up. Yeah.
So.
All right. So let's get started on our PowerPoint. Hopefully, Rodney, I can get this correct here, but we're going to start sharing a screen here. And okay. All right. Are we good there?
We're good to go.
All right. So this is the cover of our book. And our son, Nate, I think he's in on the meeting right now. He helped kind of design this and found the cover for this. And we thought it was extremely appropriate for the cover. And the name of the book is called Bad Moon Rising. And you can see John Fogerty's words, "Don't go around tonight. It's bound to take your life. There is a bad moon on the rise." And that was my brother's favorite song. The song originally came out in April of 1969, and you know, when things happened back then, the song was kind of ominous. So let me go back a little bit, way back. My brother Mike was born in 1950, and that's a picture of him, and he's 1 year old right before he gets his first haircut. And my mother saved a lock of his hair, which we still have in his scrapbook. So that's what he was when he was 1. And this is my favorite picture. This is Mike and I. We live in Ohio now. I was born in Newfoundland. Mike was born in Newfoundland. My sister Mary was born in Newfoundland, because my mother was a Newfoundlander. My dad was active duty military, and we bounced around. And we moved from Newfoundland to Ohio. And so Mike's 4 and I'm 3 in this picture. And it just brings back fond memories, this picture right here. This is years later. Mike is 18 years old now. So he was 1, and then he was 4, and then he grew up quickly. He's 18 years old. He's captain of the basketball team. This is a few months before graduation, and he was expecting to be co-valedictorian also of his high school. So he was a super athlete and one of the smartest kids in the school. Big guy, you can tell he's 6'3", about 195 pounds, and didn't have an ounce of fat on him. And so that's, I think that was taken probably maybe in February of 1969. And the next picture, this is Mike and Debbie's prom picture from 1969. They went to the prom together the year before when Debbie was a freshman. And this picture was probably taken about 10 in the evening. And things later happened, you know, that evening. But a few hours before that, Mike left to go to the prom with the song Bad Moon Rising on the tip of his tongue. But as he left to go to the prom, on his record player, right? As he left to go to the prom, he picked up he went to a packaged liquor store, and it was prom night, and picked up a little bit of booze, which you weren't supposed to do back then when you're a senior, even nowadays. And so he was a little tipsy at the prom. And as he left the parking lot, probably about 10 or 11 that evening, he peeled out and was doing donuts in the parking lot. And our car had a bad muffler on it, so Mike got a ticket. And so later that evening, I saw him, the last time I saw him was at the Carriage House Inn about midnight that night, and he throws the ticket at me and he says, "Tell Mom you got the ticket." Well, those were the first words that Mike and I had spoken since the day before, because the day before he and I got into a huge battle and we were not talking to each other. But those were the only words that we said. He said, when he said, "Tell Mom you got the ticket," then I kind of threw it back at him and I told him, "That's your baby." And that's kind of how we made up. But that was the last time I saw him, and those were the last words that we spoke. And so we went to the prom. I made it home from the prom late in the morning. And about 7:30 that morning, Mike and Debbie, well, Mike hadn't shown up at home. His curfew was 3:30. And Mom gets me up at 7:30 to go to Mass and says, "Mike hasn't made it home yet. Why don't you go to Mass?" Which was, the church was just a block down the street. And if Mike hasn't made it home yet, then we need to start making some phone calls. So I got up, and I'd only had a few hours sleep. But the whole time during Mass, I kept thinking, well, they've got to be out there, because I knew they were partying out the strip cuts. And I figured that Mike and Debbie just probably fell asleep. But I was hoping the car would be there when I got home from Mass, but it wasn't there. So we started making phone calls, calling some of Mike's friends and Debbie's friends. And then my sister Cecilia, who I think is on this meeting also, and our neighbor Mary Kay Haas, we went out to the area where they had been partying the night before, and we were looking for hours and hours, or probably about an hour and a half. And then we finally came upon this. This is our car. The police staged this on May 6th, but this was our car in almost the exact spot we found it the morning of May 4th, the day after the prom. But the doors were wide open and the keys were still in the ignition. We found the car about 11 that morning, and there were skid marks about 50 to 60 feet. So we knew that something bad had happened. And also, Cecilia and I were out there, and we still wanted to protect our brother Mikey. He was our protector our whole life, and we want to protect him. So Cecilia and I got rid of the beer cans. We got rid of a slow gin bottle, and we ditched it way out in the farmer's field and in the ditches. So when the police did eventually come, that the contraband would not be in the car, because we didn't figure that they were gone at that point, that they were that we wouldn't find them. We were just protecting Mike and Debbie, and so we hid we hid the stuff that they shouldn't have been doing. Anyway, that's where the car was that morning. So we searched all day long, and this was the newspaper the next morning, the Belleville paper. We searched all day long, and one of the last places we looked, it was getting late at night. It was, we could barely see, but we pulled up into this one dead end spot where we used to party a little bit, and there was a strip cut. And we got out of the car and we walked about 2 steps, and then we decided that they probably were not there, and we were just going to go on home. So I went home and told my mom we haven't found them. And my mother looks at me and she says, "Eddie, they're dead, and I've forgiven whoever did it." And that was the beginning stages of my denial, because I thought my mom was nuts and she was crazy and they were not dead. My dad was not there. He was still in the military at the time, and he was stationed in Thailand. And so my mother had the general from the air base, General Stoney, call my dad in Thailand. So this is Sunday evening in Illinois time. It's early morning, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, Thailand time. And the general calls my dad and says, "Your son didn't come home from the prom. Get on the next plane out of there." And my dad tells the general, "Well, I had 2 sons that went to the prom. Which one's missing?" And the general tells my dad, "Well, I don't know." So my dad flies from Thailand to the States, which takes almost 2 days, and he doesn't know which one of us is missing. So this is May 5th, which I'm going to summarize as probably one of the worst days of my life. The next morning we get up, Cecilia and I, and my mother convinced us to go to school. So we go to school Monday morning. This is 2 days after prom. Mike and Debbie are still missing. And, but we shouldn't have gone to school. Cecilia was a basket case. I was like a zombie. So I take Cecilia home about noontime because both of us were not in a good frame of mind. And so I go back out there to the area where Mike and his group had been partying the night before. And there were busloads of airmen from Scott Air Force Base looking for them. So I went away from where they were looking, driving around. And I hadn't been out there very long. And they spot their bodies from the air. There was an aero club that helped spot them. They were found about 1:30 that afternoon, and I was out there when they found them. And so this was the newspaper the next morning, telling the story that their bodies were found. And so we pull up to, this is the area where the bodies were found. See where those cop cars are parked right there? That's where Cecilia and I and our group of friends, we were parked in that exact spot the night before. And that's when we stepped out and decided we weren't going to go back there and look. And if we had walked a few more feet, we could have seen Mike's white shirt that was he was laying 50 feet away from where we were. And so I was out there when they found the bodies. The cops wanted to get rid of me. Mr. Means was out there, and
which was Debbie's father.
Debbie's father. And so Mr. Means gets in his car and he pulls up by me and he says, "Eddie, I will tell them." So it means we're going to go back to my house where my mother was and his wife, Mrs. Means, and he's going to tell them that the bodies were found. So this is the area just on the other side of where the cars were parked. One of the state troopers is pointing there. Mike's about 50 feet away from the car, from where the cars were parked. And then Debbie's body is about 40 feet kind of up on a hill away from where Mike was. And this was the last place that we almost searched. So we go on home. This is a picture of my mom that she sent my dad actually in April of that year of her sitting on our porch. And this is the same porch that Mr. Means walks up on, and my mom and Debbie's mother walk out there, and he tells them that their bodies were found. This is State Trooper Dave Young, and he is still alive, very alive, and he contributed so much to our book. He's about 75, 76 years old now, but he was a young trooper, age 25 at the time, but this is his retirement photo. And he was the first trooper, the first cop to come on the scene to see their bodies. And his initial statement was, "Only an animal would do this." Mike was shot in the head 3 times, probably died instantly. Debbie's body was left nude, hog-tied, she was beaten, and she was raped.
So as Ed and I were writing this and researching all this, one question that kept coming up over and over for us was, who does this? Who just randomly kidnaps and brutally rapes and murders people? Who does that? So just like State Trooper Dave Young said, only an animal does something like this. That was his first thought. And as we looked into this, trying to figure this out, we discovered that he was exactly right. When Ed received the police files, he found that the police back in the day had contacted a Scott Air Force Base psychiatrist wanting information about profiling who this killer could be. Who were they looking for? And his report said that this would have been somebody who had started in petty crimes and was escalating in violence. He was somebody who would have had multiple jobs, would just walk off jobs and move on. And he would be somebody with a charming personality. In fact, a woman who knew him decades later said that he was like a grandfather she never had. When Mike and Debbie's killer was found about a month later, he had 400 photographs in the trunk of his car, photographs that he had taken. Some of the people were alive, some of them were not. Police were never able to determine who they all were. His preferred victims were women, young and girls who looked like they were about 15 years of age, and that never changed throughout his life. But still, we kept wondering, what kind of person does this? So we spoke to a Harrisonburg psychiatrist and asked him to take a look at the information we had. He took the information to a monthly cohort that he meets with of other psychiatrists in the area. And then he came to our house afterwards and summed up the discussion that they had. He said the killer was most likely a psychopath and the worst of the worst. He was someone who would have violated the rights of others purely for his own self-interest, desires. He had no regard for right and wrong, no guilt, remorse, compassion. He would imitate feelings, but he had no capacity to feel them. The psychiatrist suggested then that we research psychopathic traits, which we did. And every one of the 20 traits fit this man to a T. We had anecdotal evidence for every trait. We discovered that a psychopath is literally wired differently. There are connections in the prefrontal lobe that are missing, and this can be detected through an MRI or a PET scan. Those connections govern love, empathy, compassion, remorse. Most psychopaths are not violent. In 2013, an extensive personality survey came up with some interesting information, I thought. The #1 occupation for psychopaths is CEO. 21% of CEOs are either sociopathic or psychopathic. The largest concentration of psychopaths in the United States is in Washington, D.C. Many are leaders in business and politics. They have no qualms about stepping on other people to get what they want or need. Often they'll have multiple wives and affairs because they don't connect with people on an emotional level. It's all about their own self-interest. But when you add in neglect and humiliation and abuse from early childhood on, that's when this perfect storm can lead into violence. And we know that that was the case with this killer. Before the psychiatrist left our kitchen, he said, and I quote, "There is no evidence of successful treatment with any type of medication or psychotherapy. Someone with this man's severe psychopathy could not have been rehabilitated or medically healed. When he was released from prison, he would have continued his behavior." And that's exactly what he did. Many years later, he was released from prison. He kicked into fourth gear and made up for lost time. He was constantly on the prowl for young women and remote places to take them. The psychiatrist told us that his victims probably numbered in the hundreds. So psychopaths really are wired differently, and when you add in neglect and abuse, they can become like a vicious animal. And just like Dave Trooper said, only an animal could do something like this. And that's how Ed and I came to understand a little bit better who this person was.
It's hard to understand a psychopath. And here's something that was disgusting, I think. On May 7th, which was an integral day of the investigation, this is only 2 days after the bodies were found, Debbie's mother receives a letter to Scott Air Force Base titled "The Murdered Girl's Mother." And here's just partial of it, because the rest of the letter is too disgusting. It is in the book, but this is Marshall Wayne Stauffer's handwriting, and he most likely wrote it left-handed because he said he was ambidextrous. So he writes a letter, probably on May the 6th, after he finds out who Mike and Debbie were, and sends this letter to Debbie's mother. And it starts out, I don't know if you can read it, it says, "God only knows why I did what I did to your sweet daughter and that guy she was with." Debbie was the target and Mike was just the guy. He just threw Mike away because the target was Debbie. And so that day, May 7th, was an integral part of the investigation. Several things happened. Marshall Wayne Stauffer, who was always the prime suspect, left town early that morning, and people were warned if somebody leaves unexpectedly without warning to let the police know. Well, he left unexpectedly, left his job, and called, he says, from Rolla, Missouri, calls back to his employer, Scott Air Force Base Mobile Homes, and tells them that his sister was killed in a car wreck and that he'd be back the next week. Well, the secretary that picked up the phone asked him, "How do you know she died in a car wreck? You don't have a phone." And so he would not have had a phone to receive a call. And he didn't get a telegram that they verified later that no such telegram was sent. So they immediately thought something was fishy. Also, the killer calls the police that night or that morning and tells the sheriff's office that he's the killer and he has a wounded lip. Well, in this letter that he sent Debbie's mother, he admits that Debbie bit him and put a hole in his lip. So they know that the killer has got a wounded lip. He admitted it to the sheriff's office and he wrote it in the letter also. Also that same day, Bob Shea, who doesn't mind me mentioning his name, he tells the police that he thinks he knows at least who the person was that did this, because the week before he and his girlfriend were cornered and his girlfriend was raped and they were made to strip down nude and lewd photos taken. And after he reads about the murder in the paper and what happened, this Bob Shea puts two and two together and goes to the police and says, "Hey, I think this guy was our abductor the week before." So things start coming together. Marshall Wayne Stauffer left town. He sent the letter to Debbie's mother. He called the police, and Bob Shea tells the state police, "I think I know who did it." So things started happening pretty quickly. So the funeral was, it took my dad 2 days to get from Thailand. So it was Sunday night when General Stoney called my dad. He arrived on Tuesday afternoon. My mother and the Means had already decided that there was going to be a joint funeral at the Catholic Church just down the block from us, which we were grateful that the Means family allowed that. So this picture is kind of hard to see, but this is us with the two caskets leaving the church. The church is on one end of town of Mascoutah, the cemetery is on the other. The town shut down Main Street and had cars going two abreast from the Catholic Church for a couple of miles to the cemetery. And they let all the kids out at the school, which was right next to the cemetery. So there were thousands of people at the graveside service. And so Mindy's going to talk about what it was like for my mother at sitting there as her son was being lowered into the grave.
So through through the years, sometimes the kids would get together, his family, and they would talk about during that time. But Anne never ever shared what it was like for her during that time. She would just listen to the kids as they talked, but she never shared what it was really like for her. So one afternoon, she and I were just sitting in the living room talking, and my older son had recently turned 18, which was the same age as Mike whenever he died. And I don't know, all of a sudden I asked her, well, what was that like for you? And she paused for a few moments, and then she said, during the funeral, when I was standing by the graveside, she said, I just wanted to jump into the grave and yank Mike out of there. And I just wanted to scream and scream and scream. And that's all she ever said about it.
Yeah. So during that week of the funeral, you remember the picture of Dave Young, the state trooper, that we had his retirement photo. Well, this is Dave Young, the same state trooper at age 25. And he and his partner, Trooper Charlie Grau, Dave dressed up as a woman, and they did stakeouts. And so this is about the same time that letter arrived. They didn't know if the killer was still in the area, but they were out at Lovers Lanes, and they had guns, and they were ready to defend themselves if they were attacked by this guy, but they were trying to do stakeouts. So Dave Young, he was a state trooper, he and Charlie Grau. He got actually hired by the city of Mascoutah to work directly for them, just to work on the murder case. And I even have his time table, his time chart, and he worked 331 and a half hours from May the 6th until May 28th, which is almost 15-hour days he averaged. And he had to sleep sometime in between that. So he worked his hind end off, and he was one of the key people in the book that helped us kind of put things together. So, and also he was one of the first state troopers, or first authorities that here's what happened is that Marshal Wayne Stauffer left town on May 7th, early morning of May 7th. But he rented a mobile home from Lake Suzanne Mobile Home Court in Shiloh, which is about 5 minutes outside Scott Air Force Base and about 15 minutes away from Mascoutah. And so when he left town, the 7th, his employer, Perry Wilson, suspected that this sounded fishy, but he gave him a few days. And that following Monday, May the 12th, Perry Wilson and a coworker, Bill Yount, they broke into Stauffer's trailer. And this is a trailer sitting on that exact spot. Now, I don't know if this is the same trailer, but this is the location where Stauffer lived. And they broke into a trailer, either this one or similar to this, and they found bloody cigarettes, which meant big, and the killer said they were bit on the lip. They found a bloody towel in the sink because Stauffer told police later that he came home to this trailer muddy and bloody with a hole in his chest, because he, at gunpoint, when he abducted Mike and Debbie, they suspect that he made Mike get into the trunk of the car and go back into the place where he ended up killing him, but he made Mike stay in the trunk of the car. And then when he opened up the trunk lid, Mike stabbed him in the chest and missed him by about 2 or 3 inches to get him directly in the heart. And so Stauffer had a chest wound, and Mike was a big guy, 6'3", 195 pounds. He could have possibly overpowered him, but he couldn't fight the gun, you know. So during this time period, this was, the murders happened. I was in denial. And my friends told me that I wasn't quite the same person as I was because I was in a state of depression and I didn't know it. I knew I had a headache that wouldn't go away. But I was still in denial. I'd lost my brother. I was in a state of depression, and I was just kind of spinning into my own little cocoon. And my parents eventually sent me away for part of the summer to kind of recoup, which did help me quite a bit. But after they determined that Marshall Wayne Stauffer skipped town, left his trailer with bloody cigarettes and a bloody towel, they knew who they were looking for. And so the FBI got involved. And this was the first picture that the public saw of Marshall Wayne Stauffer that was in the Belleville paper. It was the largest town next to Mascoutah in Illinois. And this was on May 28th. And so this is the first time we saw a picture who Mike and Debbie's killer was. And there was a nationwide manhunt for Marshall Wayne Stauffer, May 28th. The next day is high school graduation. Mike would have graduated co-valedictorian, and this is me, and I had to walk up on stage and accept Mike's valedictorian award. And but that same day, Marshall Wayne Stauffer is captured in Sacramento, California. So the murders happened in the early morning hours of May the 4th. He's captured May 29th. So he was on the run for 25 days. But he was captured in California. And he was captured in California because the police, things fell apart later, but the sheriff's office in St. Clair County did a heck of a job tracking Marshall Wayne Stauffer down. And they gave one of his previous employers in Sacramento, California, a heads up that he may come back and apply for a job. And that's exactly what he did. And so he was on the FBI 10 most wanted list. It came out that morning of May 29th, but luckily they didn't need for the FBI to keep searching because he was found that morning applying for a job at a previous employer. And this is on June 10th. He's brought back to Belleville. He's extradited back to stand trial. So because of Bob Shea, who connected the rape and robbery of he and his girlfriend the week before in Clinton County, the county over from St. Clair County, they decided to try the rape and murder trial first in Clinton County because they had, the victims were still alive and they could identify Marshall Wayne Stauffer. So they were going to try the rape and robbery trial first, and then they were going to do the murder trial of Mike and Debbie in St. Clair County afterwards. At least that's what we were told. So there's another picture of him. He's being transported from St. Clair County over to Clinton County. Here's what happens. So he's extradited and arrives in Belleville June the 10th. That whole summer, we're expecting that he's going to be tried for the rape and robbery and then the murder charges. But on September 8th, 1969, there was a plea bargain made between the state's attorney in St. Clair County and the state's attorney in Clinton County, that if they sentenced him to at least 50 to 52 years in prison, they would drop the murder charges. So Marshall Wayne Stauffer plea bargains to 50 to 52 years in prison if they drop the murder charges. And State's Attorney Robert Rice was in charge of negotiating that deal. Our family was not never made aware of this or the planning of this. And my dad and I, on September 9th, we're watching the 5 o'clock news, the St. Louis News, and we hear this on TV. State's Attorney Robert Rice dismisses murder charges. We were never, ever told anything about this. And Dad and I looked at each other and our jaws just dropped. We could not believe it. We trusted the judicial system, and it failed not only our family, but it failed the entire St. Louis area and Mascoutah community. So even, I have some animosity towards State's Attorney Robert Rice, who's now deceased. And when we were writing the book, I didn't put this in the book at all, but I thought, well, I'd like to give his family a chance to defend him, because I wasn't real kind to Robert Rice in the book. So I wrote a letter to Robert Rice's sons. One's an attorney and one's a judge. So I sent it to their legal office in Belleville, saying, that the book was coming out, and that I knew that their dad had regretted his decision. He stated that in a newspaper article when he retired. And I knew that their family had probably spoken about this, since they're all in the legal profession. And I wanted to hear their dad's defense in their words. But I never got a response from the sons, which tells me that they did not have a defense for their father. So Marshall Wayne Stauffer is sentenced to 50 to 52 years. And for sake of time, I'm going to kind of wrap things up a little bit here. But Stauffer does not serve 50 to 52 years. Because of the parole system in Illinois, he's let out after 21 years. So, and he's a model prisoner. We talk about that in the book, about model prisoners. He's released 21 years to the day that he's in prison, September 10th, 1990. And there's another nationwide manhunt for him again in April of 1992, because he ends up doing the same darn thing. He changed his MO, just grabbing 15-year-old girls off the street. But this guy hasn't changed. Prison didn't change him. And he fooled everybody in prison by being a model prisoner. So Stauffer goes to prison. He's convicted of another rape and robbery. He goes to prison for life. He dies in prison March 28th, 2002, which he should never have been let out of prison from the murders of Mike and Debbie in 1969. And I threw in this picture. This is just a picture of our family. This is my sister Mary in the lower left-hand corner. She's now deceased. She died of cancer. There's a picture. These are all our high school pictures. That's Mike. It's me in the upper left-hand corner. There's a picture of Cecilia. She's in on the Zoom meeting too. Hi, Cecilia. There's my little brother, Joe. He's about 10 years younger than me. My mom and dad are both deceased. They're buried in Arlington Cemetery right now. So anyway, this is one of my favorite pictures. This is my mom and I. She's my hero. I couldn't live up to her, but she passed away a few years ago. And she always stuck to her faith that things happen for a reason. And she still forgave who killed my brother. Yeah. So Rodney, I think that's about it on the slideshow. We can go to questions and answers if you want.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that amazing and I imagine difficult story to relive and retell. And I'm looking at the chat window. You should be able to turn yours on just in case there are some additional questions that come through. But right now I'm looking and I'm going to go back to the top and see the first question. When you were talking about the profile, then you mentioned a letter. The question here is, given that profile, why did the killer write the letter to Mrs. Means? And if I don't know if you know why, but you may have some ideas, Mindy, about the profile that you were talking about that you received from the local group.
Well, as we included the letter in the book, we debated about whether to do that or not because it's just so awful. But it was another way for what we think anyway. It was another way for Stauffer to enjoy that experience all over again. He used the letter he almost weaponized the letter against Debbie's mother. And he was just sort of reliving that experience again. He sent these letters. He sent letters and gifts throughout his life to his victims as one way for them to stay quiet. But it was sometimes it almost seemed like felt like he was on a date with these girls, and he just didn't understand or care that how much damage that would inflict on someone. It was all about his own self-interest. So it was a way, I think, to taunt her family. He also sent, he called the police, taunting them. It was kind of a game for him. So it was a thrill for him, I think, to send this.
Yeah. We wanted to add one more thing. I forgot. Mindy's put together some things maybe that have happened with the book since it's come out. It'll take just a couple of minutes. So Mindy, you want to summarize it real quick?
Well, the book came out last June, and so many people have asked us, what has happened since then. And so I just wanted to say that we have been stunned by its success and the response that we've received. So far, we've sold about 8,000 copies, and it's available not only in the US, but Canada, South Africa, Norway, Poland, Great Britain. In fact, it was recently on a bestsellers list in Australia. So right after Mike and Debbie died, 2 scholarships were set up at the high school for a male and a female that was graduating and going off to school. And so all of our proceeds and then many donations that people have sent in have gone into those scholarships to continue to endow that. One of the highlights of the year was addressing the student body at Mascoutah High School. And we talked about how Mike and Debbie were drinking. I don't think it would have changed anything, but we talked to the kids about how important it is to be at the top of your game mentally, because you never know whenever you could become victim and prey to a predator that's out there that's looking for an easy target. And after we talked to the student body, several students came up and shared their stories of trauma that they have experienced. And we just were so honored, that they felt safe to share those stories with us. We heard from a former Wall Street lawyer and prosecutor who now practices in Chicago.
And I think he's on the meeting now,
yeah,
Zooming.
Who's part of it tonight. He did a forensic analysis of the case, and he sent Ed 16 pages of his professional opinion of what happened, what transpired, and he concluded that the law enforcement and the attorneys were overwhelmed, incompetent, and negligent in dropping those murder charges. Let's see. Oh, Ed has been asked to speak at the to the JAG at Scott Air Force Base, the Judge Advocate General, attorneys there, about being aware of victims and their rights. Let's see. We've heard from people all over the country, from Germany, Australia. A woman from Russia here in Harrisonburg said that she learned about American culture and family relations from reading our book. And she said that she thought that Ed's mother was a strong woman with a broken soul. A surprising number of Sunday school classes and church book clubs, as well as other book clubs, have used it as a discussion platform to talk about forgiveness. We've gotten so many cards, handwritten cards and emails and phone calls from people all over the country. many of them who have suffered similar tragedies in their lives, and how valuable it was for them to have his family's experiences reflected back to them. And they said it made them feel not so alone. We were interviewed on our local public radio station by Chris Boros, and we could tell that he was really touched by Ed's story. Ed told about a dear friend of his who's also on here this evening, or this afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, Ed's buddy sent the book to his brother. They had been estranged for several years, and he was wanting to bury the hatchet. So he sent the book and he said, it's about time. But I don't think he ever heard back from his brother. After we left the station, Chris Boros texted his brother, and for the first time ever told him that he loved him. So many folks have realized that they don't always have years to say what needs to be said. So.
Okay, bring on the questions.
Well, and I'm looking at the chat window starting at 12:49. One question was he ever charged with any other murders since he apparently had committed so many? And have you spoken with other victims' families?
In the letter that he wrote to Debbie's mother, he said he had done this before, that he hadn't done this in a long time, which is admitting that he had done this before. Well,
we think he meant the murders.
The murders. Well, in September of 1967, and this murder happened in May of 1969, there was a murder outside Springfield, Missouri, that is about the same MO. They never did find out who did it, but there was bodies of a Canadian couple. They were found nude about 2 months after their murder. Their decayed bodies were found. The clothes were neatly stacked by them. They were from Canada, and they were shot with a .38 caliber Italian revolver. And Marshall Wayne Stauffer lived in the area, and he was questioned. So when I heard about this open case still, I contacted him. I said, I think I know who did it. I think it's Marshall Wayne Stauffer, the same person. And they questioned him at the time because when they searched the trailer in Shiloh where Marshall Wayne Stauffer lived after Mike and Debbie's murder, they found Canadian money in there. And from what we can find out, Marshall Wayne Stauffer was never in Canada. And he owned a .38 caliber Italian revolver, just like the one that the kids were shot with. And he lived in the area. And it was the same MO where they think that the kids were left nude and that the abductor was taking pictures of them, which is exactly what Marshall Wayne Stauffer did. So we were actually contacted by somebody from Canada about a month or so ago, and he was friends with the female victim in that murder case, and he's trying to write a book about it. And then he found out that we mentioned it in our book. So he and I are trying to get with this local sheriff's office in Springfield to try to help them maybe solve this case, because we have a pretty good idea of who we think did it. But other than that, we haven't spoke with any other of the victims.
But he has spoken to other law enforcement who was involved with this guy back in the day, and he was convicted of several other crimes where he was taking advantage of easy prey. One of the traits of a psychopath is that they're parasitic. They will get whatever they need from other people, money, and that's exactly what he was doing. He had several women who he was using their money, selling off their goods and their things, marrying them in some cases, so that he could bilk them out of their money. So he was convicted of that. One woman he did leave for dead, but she survived. He was convicted in Idaho of a couple of different rapes, and so he was busy.
Yeah. He spent about half his life in prison before he murdered Mike and Debbie for various things, and the crimes just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So
Ed, there are two questions about, I think, posed to you specifically about this journey. One is, how do you feel now compared to when you started? And then the other part of that is, can you tell us a bit more about how Mindy helped you get through the writing of the book, when it must have been so emotionally overwhelming to be immersed in this every day for such a long period of time?
yeah, I could probably combine the two into one. Is that it was hard visiting this murder every single day. And I mean, I'd stay in my lounge clothes, just like we do now during this pandemic, all day long, just writing and writing, spending 12 to 14 hours a day. And we started doing it in March of 2018. And by August, I was burned out. And even Mindy looked at me and said, I think you're depressed. And the last time I'd been depressed is when Mike died. And I was visiting that every single day, going back to it. And I did not want to continue. I wanted to quit. And this is primarily where Mindy helped, is she not just pushed me, but she supported me. And so I was finding out the facts and writing it down. And then Mindy would take over writing the story. And she'd even ask me what it was like. And she'd maybe write something. I'd say, no, it wasn't exactly like that. But she took over a big part of the writing, because it was hard visiting every single day, visiting. And there was a couple of times I would break down and just got tired of it. So how I've evolved is that I don't think I've become like immune to the emotion of it, but it helped me. I think it helped me get rid of the hate towards Marshall Wayne Stauffer, to try to be like my mother, to be forgiving, and I've never reached that point. But the hate just eats you up, and it doesn't do any good to just keep hating and hating, especially when somebody's already dead that killed my brother. So I'm trying to be a better person from this, and hopefully it has made me a better person, and to shed the hate for the killer. So I don't know if that answered the question, but maybe Mindy can shed some light.
No, I think that for Ed, for so many decades, he was still like that 17-year-old kid that was sort of still stuck in that moment. And I think through this experience, he's had to grapple with a lot of details that he didn't know about before, and just put it together to make sense of it. And he was sort of able to grab that tiger by the tail and deal with it. So I think he seems to be in a healthier place now because of it.
Except for that little heart attack I had.
And there's another question, sort of like a process and timeline. At what age did you explain to your sons, Ed and Mindy, your sons, what happened to Mike? When do you share this story? When do you think it's appropriate and you go over this part of your lives?
Well, one of our sons is on here, but he might be able to answer better than I can. But I think we never hid it from them. They kind of always knew the story, or the basis of it. I thought I knew the story, but I only knew the half of it when we started. But we never hid anything from them. They knew that they had an uncle that had been deceased, that had been murdered. So we shared it early. I think that they would probably think that as long as they could remember, they were familiar with this story. But because of that fight that I had with my brother that we really never made up, when our two sons would battle a little bit, maybe argue at each other, it would just drive me nuts. And they know that, and it probably drove them nuts too.
It's like your nails on a chalkboard for him.
So They knew this story early on. We did not hide it from them.
There's another question about changing perceptions. You talked about how you're trying to deal with things and the way you interact and you are in the world, being a better person. This question says, you've spoken about your change of attitude regarding capital punishment. Could you or are you comfortable commenting on that?
Yeah, if you haven't read the book, Stauffer was up for parole in his 11th year, and he could have been let out. So I wrote a nice little letter to the parole board, and I thought I was being cute probably. And I wrote up a letter to parole board, said, let him out. Why don't you let him out? There's probably overcrowding. He's a model prisoner, which he was. And then when you let him out, I will be standing by the front gate and I will blow him away. Well, that was not good. And I got in trouble with the parole board. And after I got in trouble with the parole board, I figured I have got to change my attitude because this guy has no clue who I am, doesn't care about me one bit. And I had to slowly change my attitude towards him and get rid of my hate. But I wanted to kill him myself. And I was an advocate for the death penalty. But I tried to be like my mother. I could never be that way. And so I slowly, and it took decades for me to finally, and I researched the death penalty and, whether it's a deterrent and how much does it cost and does it bring closure to the family, all this stuff, to the point that in 2003, I think it was I spoke before the Virginia Alternative for the Death Penalty, and I was on a panel with 3 people. The first person on the panel was a fellow that had just gotten released from death row. He was found innocent through DNA. The second person, the state of Virginia had executed her brother the month before, and then there was me. And it was powerful. And especially when the sister of the boy of the guy that was executed the month before, she stood up in tears and said, the state of Virginia murdered my brother. And since then, I've done some more research about it. He had a IQ of 79, had seizures every day, had been in a bad car accident, which caused all that. He admitted that he did it, but he didn't know what he was doing, but he got executed. Now I think they've changed the law with that, with somebody that was in his mental state. I don't think that would happen today. Then I got up and talked about my evolution against the death penalty. So it took me a long time, and I understand if people still say I'm for the death penalty because I was there. I understand that. But to me now, it just financially and morally does not make sense. I think for a civil country like the United States, it's barbaric. So it took me a long time to come to that conclusion.
It never should be released.
Yeah, but I don't think it should ever be released.
We have another question. I won't go through everything, but Sadie, thank you for sharing in the chat window your own story of loss. But Sadie says, is it different knowing who the killer was rather than still wondering? Do you think that's different, or the time period that maybe you didn't know, which there was, you mentioned a few weeks there, but is it different knowing? Does it provide any closure? Does it feel different than not being able to put a face and name with the crime?
I think it's a vast difference that I'm glad that we know, and we know that he's the killer. Not knowing, I think it just would be still like a living hell. You just don't know who did it, and the person may still be out there. So, for us, for our family, I'm glad that we knew who did it. I'm glad that the bodies were found quickly. In fact, that was one of the first things that State Trooper Young said, that was one of the first things that went through his mind, that he was glad they found the bodies for our family's sake, that, there's bodies that have never been found and families don't know what happened. And so, yeah, it doesn't bring closure, but it does bring peace of mind that we do know who did it, and it brings some resolve that we have to live with that. Not knowing, I think, is worse.
There's another question about the justice system and process that was sent to me privately. And it says, where was the federal, or what was the role of the federal prosecutor in all of this?
I don't remember a federal prosecutor being involved in this. So it was up to the state of Illinois. It was up to the local authorities in Clinton County and St. Clair County. So it was never the FBI did get involved, but they did not get involved in the prosecution of it. So that had nothing to do with it.
There's another question about contacting his family. And it says, how did they react when you contacted them while researching the book?
Well, that was scary for me initially. I told Mindy, I said, I've got to talk to Stauffer's family, at least some family member. And my sister Cecilia, who's on this meeting here, she helped me determine through Ancestry.com who is still alive and his family. And I tracked down 2 of his nephews. So I called one of them, and as I was dialing, Mindy's looking at me and she said, what are you going to say? And I didn't know what I was going to say. I was almost hoping they wouldn't answer. But I remember when the person picked up the phone and said the last name Stauffer, I didn't know what to say. So I just started saying I was doing some family research and that their family had some dealings with our family. And so then I finally fessed up to tell them what I was doing. And they really didn't know anything about Marshall Wayne Stauffer. He was the black sheep of the family, and he was not discussed. They knew he murdered some people, but they wanted to read the book after I was done. So their family members have the book, and I'm sure they've read it.
But they shared about some of the abuse that had been heaped on Marshall and his brother too, I think, as well.
Yeah.
So it gave us an idea of what that family situation was like.
Marshall Wayne Stauffer's dad weighed 450 pounds and abused him, which isn't an excuse, but then he died in surgery when Marshall was only 15 years old. So he really didn't have any guidance, and that's when Marshall Wayne Stauffer dropped out of high school and started on his crime sprees. So he didn't really, had an abusive father, and then his father died, and he didn't have any guidance at all.
There's a question about a detail. You mentioned your brother stabbing once the trunk is open, Marshall Wayne, and it says, was that his knife, or did that belong to someone else? How did he get a knife, I guess, is the question.
Okay, well, back then, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, there were tire tools in the trunk of the car with the spare tire normally. And that's how you change tires. And in one end of the tire tool was a sharp point to help get the hubcap off the car. And it's a heavy tool, and that's what Mike stabbed Stauffer with a tire tool.
Until about Bob Shea's.
And Bob Shea, who he put together that he and his girlfriend were the victim the week before the rape and robbery. He did the same thing, grabbed a tire tool in the trunk of the car, but as he was opening the trunk of the car, Stauffer told him, I better see your hands first, which meant, so that at that point, Bob Shea dropped the tire tool. But we believe that in Mike and Debbie's case, that Stauffer had already murdered Debbie, had already killed Debbie, and in his frantic was opening the trunk of the car and forgot to tell Mike to show his hands first. And that's why we suspect, that Mike was put in the trunk of the car and a similar thing happened as to Bob Shea.
And I'm looking back at the window. If you see me going back and forth, I just want to make sure no questions are missed. but I think that we've covered all in the chat window, but people do have the opportunity to unmute themselves. And I know you have a lot of friends and family joining us on today's meeting. So I will pause and be quiet so that others will get a chance to speak if they wish to do so.
Hi, Mike and Mindy.
Hi.
Who's this?
Lola.
Hi, Lola. How you doing?
Good, good. Got my book.
Lola lives in our old house.
A lot of people drive by and ask me about, they read the book.
Yeah.
Hi, Mike and Mike and Mindy. And Mindy, Barb Melby, it's so nice to see you. We miss seeing you so much. And thank you for telling this story. Appreciate that.
It was nice to see your face up there.
Thank you.
Hi, Mindy.
Who's that?
That's me. That your dad.
Ah,
Hey.
Dad.
Hey, old man.
Yep, I am old. You're right.
And I can see you too.
Where is he?
Right there.
Hey.
This has been so fascinating.
Well, I thank Kristen for arranging it so you can participate in this.
Well, she's right here by me.
Hi, Kristen.
Thank you, Kristen.
You're welcome.
Hi, you two gyppies.
Hi, Mike. It's Harriet. You can be sure that any mother would be so proud of you. You have nothing to aspire to being a son. The most wonderful son any mother could ever have. Never have any doubt about that.
This
As a mother, I can tell you.
is this Harriet Highland?
Yes.
Hey, well, Harriet Highland, you and I were the first recipients of the Means Morrison Scholarship in 1970. Did you know that?
Of course. Forever grateful.
Yeah. Thanks for joining in.
It was like you when I had the same experience rereading it. I think that you were forced to deal with it. The rest of us, we were so young, we could never get our arms around it. Now, as a parent,
Yeah.
it's just you could never imagine. But be sure you have definitely lived up to your mother.
Well, thank you very much. It's hard to do.
Oh,
Hey, Jim.
See Jim Perry.
If I get unmuted there.
There you are.
You guys did another great job.
Thank you.
Jim Perry is one of my oldest friends from Mascoutah. We hook up and see each other every year at the homecoming.
You know what's fascinating to me is the hundreds of people out there that you discovered were affected by this story all these years later. And you really hadn't been thinking about that so much as, man, it affected so many lives.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah, it is amazing. Yeah. It's gone beyond our wildest dreams. I hope that's helped a lot of people.
Yeah, I owe a lot to Mindy for making you stay after it.
Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't have done it without her.
Yeah, I
Hey,
know.
Ed and Mindy,
Hey.
I have a question. I've never asked you guys this. Since you've finished the book, have you found out anything in the research that I know you've continued that you wished you had included in it?
Well, funny that you asked that. Not that we wish we would have included, but thanks to you, we've gotten in touch with Billy Sue Stukenberger, who's helped us get in touch with the Clinton County Sheriff's Office. And the sheriff, who used to be the sheriff of Jeffrey Dahl, his son has files that we never had access to. And when we go back to Mascoutah in August, we're going to get access to Sheriff Jerry Dahl from 50 years ago. He has we have access to a whole box of files that he has about the murder case that we have never seen.
Cool.
And that should be interesting.
Hey, Dave Pruitt. He must have just left.
Yeah, this is Dick Stolzfus. Can you hear me?
Hey, Dick, how you doing?
Ed and Mindy, I was really moved by your presentation. And I think what really spoke to me was your mother's act of forgiveness, but also your struggle to come to that point.
Yeah.
But how one can correlate that forgiveness with still the need for justice. And I don't know how one works through that always.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, there was never really justice, and we have to live with that. I guess maybe get past that too, but that's tough.
Hi, Cecilia.
Hey, Cecilia.
Hi. Don't you think on that last question, Ed, that last question, that mom's faith was really the reason that she was able to get through it all?
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think the justice ever came into play. It was a matter of that was her faith, and she truly believed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that, as well as her Newfoundland background, that, you know, seemed like they had to be pretty pragmatic people, that they were used to dealing with hardships, you know, with that, you know, making their livings, so many of those people on the water. And, you know, I was astounded when I researched all of the people that were lost at sea. I mean, it was such a common thing, even in your own family. You know, your great grandparents, I think it was, or beyond. You know, whenever one grandmother was a baby, her father disappeared, and, you know, they have to pick up and just keep moving on, surviving. I think that was that Newfoundland pragmatism too.
Is Rex on there?
Hey, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Yeah, and that makes it better for everybody, I have found over the years. You did a good job. You know, I was thinking about that last question too, and I think that I think there's a difference between personal and spiritual justice and then societal justice. And I think for somebody like Ed and Ed's mother, you know, they're going to work through that differently and achieve that at some point in their lives, some sooner, some later, some never. And, you know, the societal justice is important as a society, but I just don't think it's in this case like this, it's a secondary consideration almost to what you go through personally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, I wanted to add too, I definitely affirm the role of faith. I think without a personal faith, she would not have been able to make that statement. But at a human level, you know, I'm human. And I think humanly speaking, it would really be, for me, it would be really hard to reach that point. But I do believe too, the role of faith, the grace of God, one could come to that point. And I really respect your mother for coming to that point.
Yeah, I asked my mother years later, I said, Mom, how could you do that? How could you forgive whoever did it immediately? And we didn't even know they were dead. And her response was she had to, for the sake of the family, to keep everybody strong. And she was the strength of our family during that time period. Even though she would break down at night, my dad would say she cried herself to sleep every night. But in front of everybody, she was like a rock, you know.
You know what else too, though, with all this, and I see Lynette on here, the town of Mascoutah was such a backbone for our family, that the connection we still have with them, I mean, Jim's on here and Lola's on there, that Billy Stukenberg reaching out. There are just so many people that are still, to this day, 50 years later, 51 years later, I feel like we're right there with them, and they're with us. So the town of Mascoutah was a big healing part of all of this too, because they went through it just like we did.
What is it? Oh, dog.
Be Sean's there.
Francis. Are you on, Francis?
That's weird.
I just momentarily muted everyone, and then you'll be able to unmute one at a time Ed and Mindy, I'll start with you, and that way whatever was causing that noise is no longer there.
So,
Well, Ed and Mindy, I think this is a good point too. It's unlike any presentation we've ever had before. So thank you for sharing your story with us, sharing this part of your lives with us. And I love the way that you bring people together. It reminds me how so many lives are connected to this story and to yours. And it's great seeing your family, your friends, people from back home here with you today. And I just appreciate you so much for volunteering your time and agreeing to do this. And again, what a remarkable story. I imagine it's not easy to tell, but I appreciate you being here and going through it yet again for all of us.
thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
All right.
All right, you all have a great day.
Thank you.
You did a good job.
Thank you.
Great job.
Great. It's wonderful.
Love you.
Love you too, Cecilia.